Area is measuring how much space is inside a two-dimensional object. So like if you needed to know how much paint to buy to paint a wall, that sort of a thing. Now, how do we measure area? We measure it in square units because you're literally figuring out how many squares would fit inside of a shape, and the squares are measured in some sort of measurement. They might be inch by inch, foot by foot, that sort of a thing. And the easiest way to do this is in a rectangle where you could count how many rows of how many pieces there are. And the easiest way to do that would be using multiplication. So like 4 times 8, because you have 4 rows of 8, would get you the answer. So the area of a rectangle is just the base times the height equals the area, because that's counting up how many rows fit inside. Now, the area of a triangle is half of that. It's the base times the height divided by 2, because a triangle could always be arranged to fill half of a rectangle fitting around it. And sometimes you have to cut it up and slide it a bit to do that, but it can always be done. And because of that, you get base times height divided by 2, but the height is not usually a side length unless it happens to be a right triangle. The height is the 90-degree measurement to the base that measures the distance up to the opposite corner, the opposite vertex. So make sure you're not always using a side length for the height. That's one of the most common mistakes. On a triangle like this, a lot of people struggle. The base could be any side, but you make sure you have a measurement that's measuring at a 90-degree angle to that base up to the opposite corner. And notice it's not going to be a side length of the triangle here. This would be 12 times 5 divided by 2. Here's that example. All right, we also have parallelograms, 4-sided shapes with opposite sides being parallel to each other. In this one, you could always chop off the corner and slide it over to make a rectangle, leaving you with the base times the height being the area. But the height is going to be that distance, the perpendicular distance between the two bases, not the other side length. Here's an example you could pause and look at. Okay, trapezoids, 2 parallel lines, and then the other sides can kind of do whatever. That's the shape you get when you have a trapezoid. Now, the formula is add the 2 parallel lines together, the 2 bases together, then multiply by the height, and then divide by 2. Here's an example of doing that. Make sure your height isn't the side length unless it happens to be a right angle there. It's the distance between the 2 bases. As far as why this one works, that one's a little harder to explain quickly. You could split it up into 2 triangles, which might explain why this looks like a triangle formula, but with the 2 bases added together. You could also make 2 copies of this, flip one over, put it on its side, and this ends up being a parallelogram that you then have to get the area of with a base that is the 2 bases added together, then times the height, that's our parallelogram formula, and then divided by 2 because it's twice as big as it should be. Anyway, that's the quick version of why that works. But you can just use the formula without worrying about that if you need to. And that's the area formulas that I'm going to go over in this video. And again, there were always examples that you could pause and take a look at.